compañeros por conectarse, ¿verdad?
Sí, creo que ya vamos a comenzar.
La tierra piensa, guardia, guardia, fuerza, fuerza, guardianes de la vida, guardianes del planeta, de esta tierra herida, de esta tierra nuestra, astros luminosos protegiendo la paz, bastones poderosos, precursores de paz, la voz de la conciencia representada, con fe, resistencia y con un gran ideal, de respetar la esencia de la tierra heredada y compartir amor y justicia ancestral.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is Fatima. My pronouns are she, her, ella. Welcome, everybody, to this space called In Solidarity for Peace in Colombia, organized by Vasconcelos Institute for Democracy in Action, in collaboration with the, sorry. Give me a minute. Sorry, y'all. Okay, sorry. In collaboration with the Solidarity Collective and Congreso de los Pueblos, organizations dedicated to advocating for Afro-Colombian, indigenous, campesinos, communities, and youth activist rights in Colombia. The main goal of this event is to learn about the impact of the US policies on Colombia's current social situation and learn how to connect internationally and show solidarity. Please introduce yourself in the chat, your pronouns, your name, and how you're feeling today. And before we move on, we would like to acknowledge and show solidarity with the Colombian people who have been going through hard times these past few days. We would like to have a moment of silence to honor Lucas Villas Vasquez, a student who was killed by Colombian police officers while he was exercising his right to the pacifist protest. We honor him and all the people who fight for a more equally and just society and are no longer with us. Okay, thank you everybody for this moment of silence, for being here, for being present. We thank you all for taking time of your day to show up and how to show up in solidarity for our relatives down in Colombia. Our agenda for today will have a presentation on the history of relations between the United States and Colombia. We'll have a couple guest speakers from Colombia. We'll have Luis Jaime Marin, and we'll have Maria Ramos. We'll also have breakout rooms and a reflection time. We'll have some time for questions towards the end. So please, if you have any questions throughout the event, feel free to put them down in the chat. And we'll have a section alone for that. And that'll be followed with the closing time. I would like to begin and pass the mic to Michelle Ordonez, international student at the ANSA College and student intern at Vida. So beautiful, Michelle, take it on.
Thank you so much, Fatima, for that introduction. And thank you everyone again for taking your time to be here today to know about the situation and express solidarity with Colombia. I introduce myself. My name is Michelle. My pronouns are she, her, ella. International student from Colombia. And I just want to say before I began that as Colombian, this means a lot for me, just having this space for us to tell our story that it's probably it's a story that you haven't heard. So I'm very grateful for that today. So can you see the presentation? Everything fine? Okay. All right, so just to give a little bit of context, I'm going to talk about the history of relations between the US and Colombia. These ones are some points, not all of them. These ones are just to give you a little bit of context on how US policies have been impacting the social situation and justice in Colombia. So very brief, in the 19th century, in the 1823, during that time, if you can see the map on the screen, that's how Colombia was in the past. And during the time, Gran Colombia included the territory of the present-day Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Panama. And it was a republic that it was like forming, you know, fighting to get independency from the Spanish kingdom. And then, you know, the US started to recognize it as a republic as well. So the diplomatic mission in Santa Fe was, you know, beginning in this year, 1823. And then there was a lot of, you know, things happening too. But then just to illustrate, in 1846, the US Polk administration signed a treaty with Colombia, which owned Panama at the time. Under the treaty, U.S. troops landed in Panama 6 times in the 19th century to crush rebellions, ensuring that railway was not hindered. So this is just showing how the U.S., wishes for expansionism, also, change the geography of the country. And there was like a lot going on also with Venezuela, Ecuador, but this is mainly like what happened, involving the U.S. In the 20th century, something happened, that led the mark in the Colombia's history, and that was the Santa Marta massacre, or La Masacre de las Bananeras in Spanish, on December 5th and 6th of the year 1928. And basically, a company called the United Fruit Company, it was an American company that was, you know, um, taking products like bananas and fruits and everything, from Colombia to, bring it to the US. And the working conditions weren't good at all. There was a lot of like workers' violations, rights, and what happened was that the workers organized to strike, and an army regiment from Bogota was brought in by the United States, to crush the strike. The Colombian soldiers erected their machine guns on the roofs of buildings at the corners of the main square, closing off the access streets. After 5-minute warning, they ordered to open fire into the dense crowd of plantation workers and their families who had gathered after Sunday Mass. They waited for an anticipated address from the government of that region. Between 47 to 2,000 workers were killed in the Santa Marta massacre. And the U.S. knew, about it, but there was always like a conflict of the ideologies, between who's left and right wing, and those who were in right wing were, called communist. So this was like, oh, there are just communists protesting, but in fact it was like workers that, deserved better working conditions. So mid 20th century, this, I'm skipping a lot of events here, but just to illustrate that this year was, during these times, the guerrillas started to form. And in October in 1959, the United States sent a special survey team composed of con- counter-surgery experts to investigate Colombian internal security situation. Because, this ideology of, communists, they were, like fighting back, and, they thought, because we needed rice, we wanted war. And then they were, just sending military support to the, army in Colombia. And among the other policy recommendations, the U.S. team advised that in order to shield the interests of both Colombian and U.S. authorities against interventionist charges, any special aid given for internal security was to be sterilized and covered in nature. Sorry. So at the behest of the United States, the Colombian government began attacking many of the left-wing organizations, so-called self-defense communities. In the early 1960s, attempting to reassault the territories under the control of the national government. So by the time the most famous guerrilla of Colombia, FARC, was formed by Manuel Marulanda Vélez and other members after the military attack of the community of Mariquitelia. 16,000 Colombian troops backed by the U.S. attacked the village of 1,000 inhabitants, only 48 of whom were armed. Marulanda and 47 others fought against government forces at Mariquitelia and then escaped into the mountains along with the other fighters. These 48 men formed the core of FARC, which quickly grew in size of hundreds. So here, the FARC guerrilla was imposed by just in self-defense of the communities, but then they got involved with, especially because they didn't have economic support, they got involved in narco traffic, and they began, to start alliances with this business. So that's like what happened. And if you paid attention to the the title, there was like a Plan Colombia image there. So we're gonna just watch a video about like how that was. So just gonna play it for a little bit, so just to give you a little bit of context. So can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, let me see. And do you hear okay, or?
No, we don't hear.
Okay.
So Michelle, you might have to unshare your screen. Click that thing at the bottom left.
Okay.
At the bottom left, that's when you hit share screen at the bottom left, it says share audio.
Okay. There, do you see the video?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, wait. Sorry, I forgot again. Share computer sound. There you go.
Maria McFarland Sanchez Moreno is the executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance, which she joined last September after over a decade as a drug policy analyst at Human Rights Watch. She's also the author of There Are No Dead Here, a story of murder and denial in Colombia. Her book chronicles that country's bloody history after the death of cocaine trafficker Pablo Escobar and the conflicts among Colombia's military, surviving drug lords, left-wing terrorists known as the FARC, paramilitary groups, and civil rights activists. The book is also a critique of how the United States inserted itself into Colombia's struggles in the name of our own war on drugs. I talked to McFarland recently at Reason's New York studio. Maria, thanks for talking to Reason.
Thanks so much for having me.
There Are No Dead Here is disturbing, arresting, riveting. Summarize the kind of plot line that you're telling and why it's important that people in America know about it.
So the book starts in the late 90s when paramilitary groups were rapidly expanding all over the country. These were right-wing death squads that in theory were fighting the left-wing guerrillas of the FARC. The reality is that they were also the country's biggest drug traffickers. They had picked up the reins of where Pablo Escobar had, and the Cali cartel had left off, and many of them were former Escobar associates, in fact. People who are familiar with narcos or might know the story of the Pepes who helped to kill Pablo Escobar. Well, the paramilitaries are descendants of that. Right. The U.S. At the time was pouring billions of dollars into fighting a war on drugs in Colombia. And in many cases, that money was going to the military. And the military was working very, very closely with paramilitary groups. So ultimately, what the U.S. was doing in practice was pouring money into one side, one group of drug traffickers versus another group.
And you know, this obviously in many ways is an echo of American kind of intervention in the 1980s, a little bit further up in Central America or Latin America. What was the United States trying to gain by giving money to the military and effectively the paramilitaries?
Well, the vast increase in funding came with Plan Colombia. And the idea was there to supposedly help Colombia fight drug trafficking and secure peace. And in theory, they said that they were fighting all drug traffickers. And in some cases, the U.S. was working with members of the Colombian government against paramilitary groups. At one point, they even went so far as to declare the paramilitaries a foreign terrorist organization alongside the FARC. And there were efforts to extradite some of their leaders. But in practice, it was very clear that there were Colombian military units who were working with the paramilitaries. The U.S. knew that because groups like Human Rights Watch, where I used to work, were telling the U.S. this. It was very clear. And they were just turning a blind eye to that in many cases because, frankly, I don't know. They were very committed to this policy. They were very committed to certain political leaders in Colombia. and I think it just became too difficult to deal with the implications of what was happening there.
And I mean, part of it, I guess, was with Plan Colombia. You know, and this was a Clinton era or a Bill Clinton administration initiative that was widely supported by everybody, and then it moved into the Bush era as well. But the idea that Colombia, and particularly under Escobar, it was something like 80% or more of the cocaine that was coming into America, he was bringing directly. So if we fix Colombia, then we fix America's cocaine problem.
Right. I mean, the whole premise of the war on drugs has always been that if you focus on the supply side, then you'll solve all the U.S.'s problems with problematic drug use, and that's simply not true. We've been dealing with the war on drugs for, what, 6 decades now? And drug use fluctuates, but it's never really gone down significantly.
And certainly the attempt to kind of tighten down or nail down the supply, deplete it, never seems to work, or it doesn't show up in the price on the street of anything. So how, you know, the idea being that if we were able to stop cocaine production in Colombia, the price in the U.S. would go up, the street price, and fewer people would use it, or at least we would know that interdiction was working. Are there ways in which, and before we talk about the effects in Colombia, which is really the heart of the book, and it, like I said, I mean, it's horrifying and impossible to turn away from, what is your kind of evaluation of Plan Colombia? Was it a complete failure? Is it a partial failure? What comes out of that?
Well, Plan Colombia was overwhelmingly about military assistance. Portions of it went to the justice sector for social and economic assistance. And I would say that those pieces are important to maintain, because you're talking about a country that doesn't have the capacity to hold people accountable when they commit crimes. I mean, this is one reason you have massive atrocities and everyone gets away with everything. On the other hand, I think that to some extent, all of this money is going to waste as long as you don't deal with the underlying problem of the illicit market in drugs, which is fueling organized crime on a massive scale. I mean, there are so many profits that can be obtained from that market that no matter how much money you put into fighting organized crime, there are always going to be new leaders who step into the shoes of those who've been arrested, and it's just going to continue.
So, I mean, ultimately then, and we'll talk about this when we talk about your relatively recent role, a new role at Drug Policy Alliance.
All right, I'm gonna just stop it there. So, can you see my screen? I'm sorry.
Michelle, we're still seeing the video.
Okay, let me.
So I think you have to stop share and then go back to your slideshow. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Thank you so much. So this is just to illustrate, you know, to give you a little bit of context on all of this. And I just want to finish saying that it is not something that we could control. We can control, you know, government decisions over other countries, but what we can control is like our power that we have as community to show solidarity and just to hear stories that haven't been told. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. I'll now pass the mic back to Fatima.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for this presentation and the video that we just saw. Now we would like to invite our guest speaker, Maria Ramos. Maria Ramos is a member of the Human Rights Team Pasos. She is part of the mass social and political movement of the Centro Oriente Colombiano, and also a member of the Congreso de los Pueblos and of the Human Rights Team of the COP. Bienvenida, María.
Buenas tardes para todas y para todos. Muchas gracias por la invitación.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you guys for the invitation.
Bueno, me entiendo un poco que la idea es conocer cuál es la situación actual que se está viviendo en Colombia y cuál es la situación en particular sobre el tema de derechos humanos. Entonces, comentarles un poco, una pregunta, ¿debo hacer pausas para la traducción?
Sí, por favor. Poco pausas. I understand that you know, you guys wanted to talk a little bit about the current human rights situation and context in Colombia. Just had a question: is if I have to, you know, pause my speech in order to allow for the interpretation.
Bueno, en primer lugar decir que esta situación de represión frente al pueblo colombiano en relación a las manifestaciones que hoy se dan en todo el país no son hechos que comienzan con la jornada de paro del 28 de abril, sino que esta escalada de violencia a la protesta social venía desde 2019 y es una constante por parte del gobierno colombiano. Realmente las organizaciones de derechos humanos, nosotros estamos lanzando es una alerta roja, un SOS a nivel nacional y a nivel internacional, porque las posibilidades de diálogo con las diferentes entidades del gobierno han sido cerradas. Aquí se simulan escenarios de diálogo, pero realmente si no es en las condiciones y en las reglas que el gobierno propone un diálogo, no hay posibilidades de absolutamente nada. Aunque la sociedad ha llamado a escenarios de diálogo, el gobierno no tiene disposición de dialogar con absolutamente nadie y lo que pretende realmente es militarizar el país.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight initially that, you know, the current violence that we're seeing against unarmed protesters, peaceful protesters in Colombia is not a new thing. It's not something that started on April 28th, the current strike that is happening nationwide. It's something that has been even previously during the 2019 uprising. We saw that kind of repression, and it's also something that we've been seeing across the years. Is you know, a government that is increasingly repressive, that is increasingly closing itself off to dialogue and negotiation, in which it presents itself as being willing to discuss a negotiated political solution, but in fact, if it's not under its own terms and conditions, it's not willing to talk to anyone, and instead is opting to militarize the country. Estás en mute. No te escuchamos, María.
Ay, María, creo que está en mute, sí.
Ya, les decía que varias organizaciones de derechos humanos se han dado la tarea de estar en las calles haciendo unos ejercicios de verificación en el tema de derechos humanos, pero también recopilando las agresiones que se están dando tanto por fuerza pública, policía, y los escuadrones antimotines. Yo voy a mencionar algunas de los hechos de violencia que se han registrado y algunas cifras, pero estas más bien son una muestra, porque seguramente acá aún hay muchos datos de muchas ciudades de Colombia que todavía no están reflejadas en estos informes. Entonces, esto creo que apenas es una pequeña muestra de la ola de violencia que en el país estamos viviendo.
So there's been a number of human rights organizations that are in the streets accompanying different protests, who have been documenting the abuses that have been committed mainly by the police, as well as the ESMAD, which is the anti-riot unit. I'm going to talk about some of these numbers, but understand that this is just a small sample of what is happening in many, many cities in which we cannot have presence, in which there is no observers. And so just know that the number is much likely or very likely much higher than these kinds of numbers that I'm going to share with you.
Hemos registrado alrededor de 426 personas heridas heridas tales como lesiones oculares, 31 de estas corresponden a este tipo de heridas, 24 personas heridas con arma de fuego, 58 defensores de derechos humanos agredidos, agresiones bastante graves donde no ha habido asistencia médica, el deber de auxilio y de socorro ha sido negado por parte de la fuerza pública. Hemos registrado también 15 casos de violencia sexual cometidos por funcionarios de la policía. Van alrededor de 1.300 personas detenidas en procedimientos totalmente arbitrarios, donde han sido sometidos a tortura, a tratos crueles, y pues en la mayoría de casos de estas detenciones, al no haber algún delito, alguna falta que tipifique delito, pues en su mayoría han quedado en libertad. Han habido 12 allanamientos, de estos 8 han sido declarados ilegales. Se han presentado alrededor de 600 denuncias por abuso de poder y autoridad por parte de la policía. Tenemos una cifra de 27 personas fallecidas durante las manifestaciones. Hay un reporte de 165 personas de las cuales se desconoce el paradero hasta el momento. Con estas cifras se da cuenta que la restricción de la libertad es la regla general y no la excepción. La intención de inmovilizar la protesta social es algo, pues es un hecho realmente.
Yeah. So here are some of the figures that we've been able to document over the past few days. We're talking about 426 people injured during the mobilizations, mainly or significantly to the eyes and face. There's been 31 people with eye injuries because the police mainly shoots people in the eyes. 24 people injured because of gunshot wounds. 58 human rights defenders attacked, beaten by police without any medical attention or assistance allowed by the authorities. 15 acts of sexual violence perpetrated by police. We're talking about 1,300 people detained arbitrarily. In many cases, we see cases of cruelty and torture to the folks who have been detained. We're talking about 12 illegal searches to people's houses and homes, 600 600 cases of abuse of force by the police, and at least 27 people dead. We're talking about 165 people who are currently disappeared or whose location is unknown. Many of these people have been taken by police and we don't know where they're being detained or where they're being held. And some of them are showing up later kind of dead in the rivers. And so this kind of systematic use of violence shows that the commitment of the armed forces and the police is to demobilize the population, is to terrorize the population into going back into their homes and not protesting.
Uh-huh. Hay que mencionar que la fuerza pública tiene toda una normatividad y una regulación de cómo debe actuar en las manifestaciones. Toda esa normatividad se la han saltado, tanto la normatividad nacional como internacional. No ha importado que de esto haya quedado registro en redes sociales, en cámaras. Las violaciones y las infracciones han quedado expuestas ante todos los medios de comunicación, y esto no ha sido una señal, esto no ha servido para que ellos detengan su accionar violento. La labor de quienes somos defensores de derechos humanos ha sido burlada, ¿sí? Incluso las declaraciones de los alcaldes de algunas ciudades ha sido una actitud de burla frente a lo que nosotros estamos haciendo en los espacios de diálogo con con los gobiernos de las diferentes ciudades. Hay unos diálogos hipócritas, realmente nuestra acción en la práctica no es reconocida. Cuando estamos en la calle, dialogar con la policía es algo que no tiene, digamos que no tiene posibilidades. El ejercicio de policía de inteligencia ha sido evidente y descarado. Aunque esto está permitido, esto se ha prestado para que ellos de manera arbitraria también abran fuego contra los manifestantes. Hubo un caso de un municipio cerca de la capital donde el capitán de la SIJIN de ese municipio, por sabotear los actos de protesta, resultó herido durante la manifestación y esta persona falleció. Esto es producto de su mal proceder. Yo no justifico la muerte de este funcionario. Lo que estoy dando cuenta es que su mal proceder les está afecta incluso la integridad de ellos mismos.
I wanted to just highlight quickly and remind folks that there are regulations and norms that are supposed to police the police when they engage in these actions that are both national in nature and also international norms that they've just completely ignored during the past several days. Along with our role as human rights defenders has been made a mockery of by the authorities, including by local mayors and political figures who have treated our work with such disrespect and has made dialogue in the street to try and diffuse some of these instances almost impossible, along with the police carrying out intelligence operations mainly through infiltrating these protests dressed in civilian clothes that has actually ended up backfiring because they tried to instigate the protests into engaging in violence. And there was a case of a municipality just outside Bogota where the chief of police was actually infiltrating one of these protests, and he ended up being injured by the police himself, and later succumbing to those injuries. And so even the way that they're trying to gather supposedly intelligence is leading to the unnecessary death of their own members. So this is just to say that they're handling this in very obviously neglectful ways.
Nosotros estamos exigiendo, bueno, y decimos que es fundamental que la policía deje de tener un carácter militar y de represión. Las manifestaciones cada vez están dejando más heridos y muertos por actuaciones que están totalmente por fuera de cualquier estándar internacional. Cuando nosotros exigimos que pare el tratamiento de guerra a la protesta, nosotros de lo que estamos hablando es de respetar y de garantizar los derechos humanos, de aplicar las normas y los principios del derecho internacional humanitario. Es decir, que el gobierno, que el Estado reconozca la protesta como un derecho constitucional, legal y legítimo de los pueblos para exigir el resto de derechos. En ese sentido, él debe garantizarlo, ¿cierto? Y proteger a quienes lo ejercemos. Y debe distinguir objetivos, hacer uso proporcionado de la fuerza, ¿cierto? Debe de tener la lógica de amigo y enemigo. Y la población, y pues debe distinguir la población entre objetivos legítimos e ilegítimos.
So one of the things that we're asking the government is to demilitarize its police and its use of force, right? To stop treating these protests as an act of war, and that they obey the international and constitutional norms that allow the right and guarantees to engage in peaceful protest, which is an essential right in any democracy to guarantee all the other rights that people have. And so we have to make sure that the police isn't treating us and treating protesters as military targets, and that they do make distinctions between the civilian population and other military targets that they may have and military operations that they're conducting. And so that this treatment must stop in order to prevent the unnecessary deaths and repression that we're seeing currently in the streets.
Uno de los departamentos fronterizos con Venezuela, Arauca, desde el 28 inició un paro cívico en todos sus municipios. Es interesante ver que allí, aunque confluyen básicamente todos los actores del conflicto, insurgencia, grupos paramilitares, ejército, disidencias, algunos grupos de narcotráfico, también existe una gran fortaleza en las organizaciones sociales. En estos lugares, digamos que no hay confrontación directa con la fuerza pública. Allí el conflicto se comporta de una manera distinta. Y aunque no han habido confrontación, repito, confrontación con la fuerza pública, sí se mantiene el bloqueo a las vías, se mantiene la exigencia de que se retiren tanques militares que hay en el departamento. Digamos que aunque no hay fuerza, no hay policía o antimotines allí, el control no hace falta también, porque es un departamento que el control lo tiene prácticamente el ejército, ¿sí? Y pues es un lugar de gran influencia de la insurgencia. Entonces se destaca también el ejercicio democrático que hacen allí las organizaciones indígenas, organizaciones de campesinos, organizaciones sociales, quienes también han instado al gobierno, como en casi todos los departamentos, a sentar una mesa de diálogo para ubicar salidas a la grave crisis que vive el país, no solamente en materia de derechos humanos, sino en materia laboral también. Hay que destacar, digamos, para ilustrar las denuncias que les mencionaba, la censura a prensa ha sido bastante fuerte. Algunos periodistas han aparecido en carteles como líderes mortales, ¿sí? Y ellos tienen atrás historias de persecución. Entonces, esto lo que hace es ubicarlos como blancos legítimos y también son ejercicios que se entienden como una censura a la labor de prensa y una persecución a la organización social.
So yeah, there's a couple of things I wanted to highlight. One thing that's very interesting is that in Arauca state, or in the region of Arauca, which is on the border with Venezuela, and despite being in probably the cross section of so many different armed groups, including the insurgency, paramilitaries, narco traffickers, the army, they've been engaged in a civic strike since April 28th. Blocking roads, limiting mobility, and yet there hasn't been a major confrontation with the state, even though it's mainly controlled by the army, and it's also probably due to the strength of the civil society and civil organizations there that are exercising their democratic right and are still calling on the military to withdraw its tanks and its presence in the area. But there hasn't been this level of violence against those protesters as we've seen places like Bogota and Cali. Another thing I wanted to highlight was media censorship and the censorship of journalism in Colombia during this past few days. We've seen even different signs with the faces and names of different journalists and figures who have already had a history of persecution because of their advocacy and because of their journalism. And so we've seen that this is a kind of threat, a kind of censorship, and making them legitimate military targets for many armed groups, both legal and illegal. So that's something we have also seen in Colombia has been major censorship against the right to disseminate information.
Defender los derechos humanos en Colombia es una labor de alto riesgo. Prueba de ello es que uno de nuestros compañeros en Bucaramanga, seguramente más adelante ampliarán el tema, un abogado fue brutalmente golpeado, detenido injustamente, sufrió tratos, recibió tortura estando en instalaciones policiales y la policía niega esto públicamente, aun cuando los medios de comunicación a nivel nacional han dado cuenta de los tratos crueles que se presentan. Otras infracciones al VIH que hemos evidenciado ha sido, por ejemplo, el aterrizaje forzado en colegios en la ciudad de Bogotá, donde amenazaron a la seguridad privada del colegio para obligarlo a que pues, las fuerzas militares aterrizaran hace 2 noches en la ciudad de Bogotá. Recordemos que los colegios están protegidos o son espacios que están protegidos por el derecho internacional humanitario. Hay ciudades como Cali, donde el recrudecimiento pues en esta escalada de violencia ha sido bastante aterrador. Acá nosotros estamos viviendo es noches y días de terror, donde en Cali se han presentado varias noches donde hay masacres. Desde la primera noche que se conoció alrededor de 7 personas asesinadas por la fuerza pública, se empezó a alertar pues sobre la escalada de violencia que se vivía. Sin embargo, los constantes llamados al gobierno colombiano y a la comunidad internacional no han sido suficientes porque las noches posteriores en Cali han habido nuevamente masacres, se ha impedido la labor de derechos humanos, se impidió la llegada de personal médico, se ha restringido el acceso a Internet, se ha restringido los servicios públicos, también en una finalidad de restringir, pues que el país conozca qué es lo que está sucediendo. Las noticias que circulan por redes sociales o lo que podemos informar por redes sociales de manera intencional es borrada de las páginas de las organizaciones o de las personas que hacen estas denuncias. Aquí está primando la defensa. Okay.
So, defending human rights in Colombia is a very high risk endeavor. In fact, in the city of Bucaramanga, one of our colleagues, who's a human rights lawyer, was brutally beaten. He was arbitrarily detained by police and even tortured while he was detained, something that the police denies in spite the investigation of multiple media outlets that show the contrary. Another abuse by the police of international humanitarian law has been the forced landing and use of schools, including elementary schools, as military bases, something that is illegal under international law. You can't use civilian infrastructure as a base for military operations. But they have pressured the security of these schools to allow them to be used as landing pads to provide extra supplies to the military who's on the ground. In the city like Cali, we've seen several nights of absolute terror, of state terror. Every night there seems to be a new massacre. The first night of protest, there were 7 people murdered. The murders have not stopped in spite of the announcements by international organizations and international pressure to stop the massacres. We've seen an increase in militarization. And in fact, we've even seen the blocking of internet access in the city of Cali. Many of our posts that have to do with documenting what is happening on the ground are suddenly erased from social media websites like Facebook and Instagram without any explanation. So we're seeing this massive censorship going on to prevent the dissemination of accurate information to the rest of the country.
2 cosas finalmente. Todo esto se entiende en una lógica de prácticas genocidas que no es nueva, no empieza este año ni en 2019. Aquí la intención del Estado es eliminar todo ejercicio de oposición al plan hegemónico, mientras el gobierno persista en defender la propiedad privada, nosotros persistiremos en defender la vida y la libertad.
So lastly, I just say that, this is in line with the kind of genocidal practices that the Colombian government has been putting in place long before these protests began, which is always to eliminate any opposition, any legitimate grievance that people have in terms of the dominant hegemonic model, political and economic model that is dominated by a few elites. And for us, we'll continue to document these abuses, and we'll continue to defend freedom and democracy in Colombia.
Ya yo le daría pues oportunidad que el resto participe.
So I'd move on to any of the other speakers as well.
Gracias, María. So we have Luis Jaime Marin. Is Luis Jaime here? The second speaker. No. All right, I guess we can move to the activity, Fatima.
Carlos no sé. Carlos está acá. Es que, perdón, Michelle.
No, tranquilo, es que no sabía.
Dime.
No sé, Carlos, si está otro representante de Congreso que quiera.
Sí, está el compañero Leonardo y está el
Leonardo.
compañero Juan Pablo.
Oh, okay. So, es Leonardo.
Sí, hola, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes, Leonardo.
Sí, hola.
Si quiere, le damos la palabra. Si quiere expresar algunas palabras.
Listo. Saludarlos. Soy Leonardo, abogado, defensor de derechos humanos, profesor de Derecho de la Universidad Industrial de Santander, perdón, profesor de Derecho Penal Internacional. Y como abogado y defensor de derechos humanos me encuentro cubriendo en terreno las marchas y el paro en la ciudad de Bucaramanga, una ciudad ubicada en el nororiente colombiano y de cerca de 1.200.000 habitantes.
So hello, everyone. I want to greetings to everyone. My name's Leonardo. I'm a human rights defender. I am also a professor of law at the Industrial University of Santander, which is in Bucaramanga. And I specialize in international law. And as a human rights defender and as a professor, I am currently accompanying the protests in the city of Bucaramanga, which is located in northeastern Colombia. It's a city of approximately 1,200,000 people.
En este momento es un momento histórico para Colombia. La gente cansada de las políticas neoliberales aplicadas por los gobiernos de la ultraderecha de las últimas décadas. La gente no aguantó más, estalló y está en las calles. En este momento, por ejemplo, para yo poder rendir y estar con ustedes, me ubiqué en otro lugar, pero en este momento en mi ciudad, la gente está en la calle protestando.
So we're witnessing a truly historic moment here in Colombia of people who are tired of the neoliberal policies that have been imposed by far-right governments, and people just rose up kind of spontaneously all across the country, including my own city here in Bucaramanga, where I had to move location in order to be able to be here with you because people currently today are in the streets.
Igualmente, las universidades públicas y algunas privadas estamos en paro. Como profesor, le dije a mis estudiantes que salieran al paro, que estuvieran en la calle, que no fuéramos indiferentes, que la universidad pública primero hay que defenderla, pero los estudiantes tienen que salir. Y eso nos permite entender quién es el que está en la calle. No son miles. Creo que los medios de comunicación han negado la dimensión de lo que está ocurriendo en Colombia. la gente joven, pero también la gente sin trabajo, los que no valen nada, los invisibles, los que viven en la barriada, son los que se están movilizando. Y un sector de la clase media que se ve afectada por las políticas neoliberales del presidente de la ultraderecha, Iván Duque.
So also to add that, many public and even private universities are currently on strike. And as a professor, I have encouraged my students to participate in these mobilizations, to not be indifferent to the situation of others and to, show their discontent in the streets. Because we're seeing that this mobilization isn't just a couple of thousand, that the media has tried to present and radically underestimate what is actually happening. That includes millions of youths, of the unemployed, of the invisible class, and even sectors of the middle class that have been increasingly affected by these, austerity measures and neoliberal policies over the past few decades.
Y como defensor de derechos humanos, en la que formo parte de un equipo, un colectivo de abogados, abogadas, comunicadores y otras profesiones, estamos en la primera línea como defensor de derechos humanos. Es decir, estamos ahí adelante donde están las fuerzas represivas del Estado reprimiendo y atacando con armamento comprado con recursos de los Estados Unidos, del gobierno de los Estados Unidos. Somos testigos de cómo se reprime, cómo se golpea y cómo se impide el ejercicio de la protesta social. Estamos adelante, recibiendo incluso la represión directa de una institución corrupta y genocida como es la Policía Nacional.
And as human rights defenders, we're on the very front lines of what is taking place in the streets. And we can witness with our own eyes the repression and the use of force using weapons and equipment that is given to the Colombian armed forces by the US government in order to repress its people and even repress us. We've been victims of this same repression ourselves. And we can see exactly how, this extremely corrupt institution that is the National Police is using those weapons to beat down these protests.
Llevamos 9 días en la calle, en mi ciudad, en mi región. Y uno de esos días, todos los días hemos estado. O sea, de aquí termino esta entrevista y me voy para la calle. Y el 3 de mayo, nosotros salimos con chalecos que dice Derechos Humanos y con un carnet. El 3 de mayo fui golpeado y fui reprimido por la policía, no importando que yo tenía mi chaleco. Y hace 2 días, otro compañero nuestro, el abogado Joan Moreno, fue fuertemente golpeado, como lo planteaba María, fue detenido arbitrariamente, un policía le rompió la cabeza, lo esposaron, lo llevaron a una estación de policía y fue torturado, tal como dice todo el derecho internacional de los derechos humanos, física y psicológicamente. Y además, nuestro compañero le iniciaron un proceso de violencia de un delito llamado violencia contra el servidor público. Es decir, ahora resultó que él fue el golpeado y la policía dio una declaración de prensa diciendo que él fue el que golpeó al policía. Si eso es lo que le pasa a un defensor de derechos humanos, quiero que ustedes piensen en lo que hace el Estado colombiano, la Policía Nacional, con los recursos que llegan de los Estados Unidos para reprimir a miles y miles de colombianos. Nuestro compañero es abogado, pero imagínense un muchacho pobre de los barriadas o una compañera de una barriada. Imagínense lo que hacen en los CAI. solamente para entender el nivel de violencia del Estado colombiano y cómo se reprime la protesta social.
So this is the ninth day straight of popular mobilization in Colombia, and it's still ongoing. In fact, as soon as I'm done here with you, I'm going back into the streets, just as I've done the past few days. In fact, on May 3rd, I was part of a human rights team that was in the streets. I was carrying my vest. I was carrying proper identification as a human rights observer. And yet I was beaten badly by police. And so I saw this firsthand. And as Maria was mentioning, one of our colleagues, John Moreno, who is a lawyer, a human rights lawyer, was also brutally beaten. His skull was cracked. He was arrested. He was taken into a detention facility where he was physically and psychologically tortured by police. And when he was released, they even charged him with having committed battery against the police. So not only did they beat him and torture him, now he's supposedly the victimizer. And I also want you to imagine what happens to people who aren't part of a human rights team, who aren't lawyers, right? Who in fact live in these poor neighborhoods, who live in misery and poverty. You know, what kind of repression that they face with these U.S. weapons that are provided by the U.S. government. Imagine what happens when no one is looking. Imagine what happens in these police facilities when it is not a lawyer or a human rights defender, but in fact, a poor woman or a poor man who happens to be caught up by the police.
Bien, seré corto para no cansar. Colombia, el gobierno de Colombia es uno de los países, creo que el segundo o tercero, que más ayuda recibe de los Estados Unidos. Y esos recursos que llegan van para compra o para apoyo militar. Pero en este momento, Colombia se están violando los derechos humanos de manera sistemática y generalizada. Y se presenta a Colombia como un problema de narcotráfico o un problema de carteles. No. Colombia, lo que tenemos en este momento es un problema de miseria y pobreza. Y quiero contar a ustedes que están en un sitio privilegiado, en un país privilegiado, contar que el que sale a marchar en Colombia son los muchachos más pobres, que no tienen universidad, que no tienen estudio, que no tienen trabajo. Y llevamos 9 días donde ellos y ellas son protagonistas, donde ellos son sujetos colectivos, donde son personas y son sujetos que quieren transformar esto. Colombia se cansó de las políticas neoliberales de Duque y se cansó de la injerencia de los Estados Unidos, que apoyan un ejército criminal y asesino y apoya la violación de los derechos humanos. En este momento, el Congreso de los Estados Unidos debe decidir congelar la ayuda de los Estados Unidos. Y todos los que están aquí presentes, privilegiados, primer mundo, que ya recibieron la vacuna contra el COVID, deben presionar a su gobierno que deje de matar, que deje de asesinar y deje de apoyar a nuestra gente. Y estoy ubicado en una zona cerca de la frontera con Venezuela, llamada Catatumbo, donde existen tropas de los Estados Unidos, existen asesores de los Estados Unidos y existen mercenarios de los Estados Unidos. Son responsables de lo que está pasando en Colombia.
So I'll be brief to not tire out the interpreter, but I want to point out that Colombia is the second or third highest recipient of U.S. aid, and most of which is military aid, which is used obviously to repress thousands and thousands of Colombian people who are currently mobilizing to change the country. And the Colombian government will often represent the situation as being, a problem of cartels or a problem with drug trafficking, that is the main problem in Colombia. When in fact, the main problem in Colombia is one of poverty, is one of misery, and one of inequality. And to understand that the people currently in the streets are young people, mainly people who don't have access to higher education, people often that are unemployed and have no access to any jobs, and are currently acting as a collective unit to change history. They're currently the protagonists of this historical moment. And I would also add, as an audience that is located in a privileged country, such as the United States, folks who have access to lots of privilege and resources, to understand that the United States is intervening in the situation, has been intervening in Colombia for the past several decades, and that the Colombian people are tired of Duque's neoliberalism and the neoliberalism of the Colombian elite, but also are tired of the US intervention. And I would add that it is necessary for folks who are in a privileged position and who have already had access to the vaccine to pressure members of Congress to put a freeze on US aid and US armament to the Colombian military, who is using that armament to murder, to kill, and to massacre its own people. So I'd ask the government of the United States to stop killing our people and to stop assisting those who are doing the killing, and stop aiding and abetting these human rights abuses, this systematic human rights abuses. Currently, I'm located in Catatumbo, a region in eastern Colombia, where there is presence of US troops, of US military so-called advisors, of US mercenaries. So the active presence of the US military is here, and the US is also responsible for what is going on in Colombia.
Bueno, y quiero terminar ya, porque cada vez que hablo de Colombia me molesto, me da rabia, me indigno, y no quiero hacerlo con ustedes porque no tienen la culpa. Pero quiero decir que en Colombia el problema no es el narcotráfico, como ya lo dije, es el problema de pobreza, de miseria. Y que lo que hacemos en este momento es ya. No es la gota, las reformas de Duque que está planteando no es la gota que llenó el vaso. El vaso ya estaba lleno. Y hay que entender y hay que leer lo que está pasando en América Latina. No es un problema solamente de Colombia. Por eso espero que el nivel de represión, la comunidad internacional o los países primermundistas estén observando lo que pasa en Colombia. Por ahora, yo de aquí salgo a la calle y seguiremos denunciando todo lo que hace la fuerza pública y denunciando a este gobierno que solamente le interesa los privilegios de las multinacionales, principalmente de Estados Unidos y Europa, y no le importa la población campesina, indígena, negra y nosotros, la academia, que somos críticos. Entonces, dejo para preguntas, si quieren hacer.
I'll add one more thing. I'm sorry. Every time I talk about Colombia, I just feel so much passion and rage of the injustices that I see. But I just want to clarify that what is happening in Colombia isn't about drug trafficking, but in fact is about poverty, right? And it's a structural problem.
Ay, qué bestia. No lo supe apagar. ¿Sí ven? Sí, 20 años.
I'll try to summarize. But that these reforms, these current tax reforms, are not the reason why people are on the streets. The injustices had already piled up too high. The cup, so to speak, was already full. This was just, the straw that broke the camel's back. And so just to understand that these are structural problems, and this is not just a singly or or uniquely Colombian problem. This is happening all across Latin America, and you guys have to understand how that is connected, especially those who are located in the global north or in the so-called first world, that they keep an eye on what's happening in Latin America and denounce the repression that is being imposed on the protesters. So after this, I'll go back into the streets and I'll continue, and we'll all continue to document the brutality and the repression that is being enforced by the Colombian police and the Colombian military. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll open up for any questions that people have.
Muchas gracias, Leonardo, por estar aquí. Thank you, Leonardo, for being here, and Maria too, for your words and giving us an insight of what's going on currently in Colombia. Thank you, Evan, as well, for your live interpretation. Very grateful to have the three of you here to let us know, right, and acknowledge our privilege of being in the U.S. And, we do have power to tell our own government to stop and to voice our concern. So and after hearing, our speakers, I would like to have a moment to reflect. As students who are present here, we'll be in breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. So please consider the following questions and also prepare some questions of your own for our Q&A section. And our questions have been put in the chat. So if you can copy paste to have access to them, that'll be great.
And then I'm going to open the breakout rooms, and the speakers will all be thrown into the breakout rooms too. If you want to leave the room and come back, that's fine. You can take a break. So.
La gente salió por otra sala.
Sí, no supe bien cómo iba a ser la dinámica, pero puede que estén en otra sala con otras personas.
Sí, ahorita ellos están en diferentes grupos para hablar de lo que se acaba de hablar ahorita. So, pusimos preguntas en el chat para que ellos empiecen a reflejar en lo que acaban de escuchar y tratar de contener la información.
I'm moving people around a little bit. 5.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I should join one.
Big helper.
Do we have
okay, Fatima, I think everybody's back.
All righty, so welcome back, everybody. We hope you had a nice conversation about the meaning of solidarity. Now we will open the space for anyone to share or ask any questions to our guest speakers. And to start off, we do have 2 questions that were placed in the chat earlier. The first one, can you explain what the strike is about? What are the people asking for?
You want me to translate that? Or...
Yes, please.
Okay. Bueno, van a hacer una sesión aquí de preguntas y respuestas. Creo que Leonardo ya se fue. Pero la primera pregunta es de qué se trata el paro, ¿no? Y qué están pidiendo las personas, pues. ¿Cuáles son las peticiones del pueblo?
¿De una vez?
Sí, dale, Carlos.
Vale. ¿Cómo están, compañeras? Mi nombre es Carlos Ramírez. Soy parte de la Comisión Integral del Congreso de los Pueblos.
Hey, everyone. How's everyone doing? My name is Carlos Ramirez. I'm part of the organizing team of Congreso de los Pueblos.
Como nos decía María y Leonardo, hay un histórico de acumulado de indignación que se ha venido construyendo. En el caso del campesinado, por ejemplo, el Estado colombiano no reconoce la figura del campesinado, sigue desarrollando una política extractivista, de avance del narcotráfico como política de Estado, de avance de la megaminería y golpeando, asesinando y desplazando al movimiento campesino de los territorios.
So as Maria and Leonardo had mentioned previously, there's a number of historical grievances that have been accumulating over the past several decades, including, the lack of recognition of the campesinos, small-scale peasant farmers who lack any kind of protection or guarantees from the government, and in fact are often repressed or face forced displacement in favor of, agribusiness or extractive projects like mining projects.
Sí. El movimiento indígena, el movimiento negro también ha sido fuertemente golpeado. En el caso, por ejemplo, de la gente que firmó los acuerdos de paz con la gente de la FAREP, viene sufriendo el incumplimiento sistemático de lo acordado por el Estado y se cierra, se canceló la mesa de negociación con la que queda ahora como guerrilla más fuerte de Colombia, que es el Ejército de Liberación Nacional.
There's also the indigenous movement that has been heavily victimized over the years, as well as the Black or Afro-descendant movements and communities in Colombia who have also faced repression and assassination in search of greater autonomy and protection of their territories. We also see a systematic killing and violation of the rights of those who signed on to the 2016 peace accords, the former FARC guerrillas who are trying to reintegrate into society and face political persecution and violence. And also the closing of the negotiation table with the ELN, which is the second largest and now biggest guerrilla organization in Colombia.
Desde el movimiento social denunciamos la judicialización de muchos de nuestros líderes y lideresas, el asesinato de muchos de nuestros líderes y lideresas, e insistimos cómo hay una política de Estado de genocidio, matando físicamente a compañeros y a compañeras, pero también estigmatizando y buscando el asesinato político de la oposición en Colombia.
So we also, as Congreso de los Pueblos and as popular movements, we face judicial persecution, right? Criminalization of our leaders, as well as the physical extermination of our leaders in the form of assassination. This is a genocidal policy against popular movements, and not just through assassination, but also through stigmatization, right? Which seeks to try and vilify and criminalize popular leadership so that other members of society will commit the crime of assassination.
Esas razones son de mucho peso, pero de forma real, lo que ha hecho que tanta gente salga a la calle son las medidas económicas que viene impulsando el gobierno desde hace mucho tiempo. Políticas neoliberales, políticas de beneficio a las grandes corporaciones transnacionales y de deterioro de la vida en su conjunto.
So those reasons in and of themselves have a lot of weight, especially in rural and popular segments of society. But I think one of the things that has pushed people into the streets have been the very unpopular economic measures that this government has been pursuing, mainly neoliberal policies of privatization, ones that benefit transnational corporations, mainly the biggest corporations, and that negatively impact the quality of life of regular Colombians.
Tenemos muchas cosas por las cuales protestar, pero si se quiere, el detonante que permitió que la gente saliera en masa a la calle fue la reforma tributaria que buscaba que la deuda que tiene el país, el déficit que tiene económicamente el país, la pagáramos los pobres, las clases medias, mientras la gente más rica y las grandes empresas transnacionales no pagan impuestos prácticamente en Colombia.
And so on that, one of the most powerful detonators of this wave of unrest was the tax reform that was tried, that Duque tried to pass through, which was in regards to the fiscal deficit that Colombia has, and trying to fill that deficit by raising taxes on the poor and middle classes, while the rich and the largest corporations essentially pay no tax.
Si bien organizaciones, movimientos sociales como el Congreso de los Pueblos estamos en las calles, es necesario insistir que los millones y millones de personas, o la gran mayoría de las personas que están saliendo a la calle, es gente indignada que por la política del gobierno, agravada en el tiempo de la pandemia, perdió sus trabajos, el sistema de salud privatizado no permite el beneficio para las mayorías, la situación, por supuesto, de estudio sigue siendo un privilegio y no un derecho, es decir, la movilización en su conjunto, más que una carga organizada de definiciones, está cargada de la histórica indignación de un pueblo que está asfixiado por este modelo de muerte.
So even though there's many grassroots organizations like Congreso de los Pueblos that are currently on the streets, it's important to highlight that the vast majority, that the millions of people who are on the streets, also don't belong to any organization, that just reflect the lack of dignity or the dignified rage of the people who have been oppressed for so long. Folks who have lost their job because of the economic crisis, people who have lost family members because of the mishandling of the pandemic and the privatization of healthcare in this country. So people who have felt the weight and the brunt of these kinds of neoliberal reforms, those are the people really waving this flag, and they're not part of any kind of organized table or list of demands, right? It just reflects just a categorical rejection of the current policies put in place.
En otros momentos, la violencia del Estado ha hecho que el pueblo vuelva a las casas, pero en este momento, de forma impresionante, la gente más bien ante el asesinato, ante la violación sistemática de derechos humanos, ante la violencia de parte del Estado, eso está provocando mucha más rabia y mucha más gente en las calles.
So historically, when we've seen these mobilizations, the state predictably answers with violence, and that violence often is enough to get people to return home and to stop mobilizing. But this, counterintuitively has been met with even more rage and even more mobilizing. So more and more people are pouring into the streets as a consequence of the images of people being murdered and mowed down in the streets.
Hay, por parte del Estado, un tratamiento de guerra contra la manifestación, contra las y los manifestantes, y eso nos pone en un momento en el que ya no solo la gente protesta contra la reforma tributaria, sino porque caiga este mal gobierno. Tal vez las mayorías no lo pueden o no lo teorizan de forma tan elaborada, pero sí sabemos, y cuando uno habla con la gente en la calle, la gente sabe que los partidos tradicionales no van a generar un cambio, que este gobierno no va a generar un cambio, y por eso necesitamos un cambio estructural, no solo de maquillaje, sino que cambie estructuralmente la situación en Colombia.
And so we're seeing, an increasingly militarized or military treatment against peaceful protesters. And people, that has transformed this protest from simply being against tax reform to being against the entirety of the government and the traditional political structure and class that has ruled Colombia. And that might not be kind of how a normal, regular person on the street would say it, but I think it's understood if you talk to anyone. The kind of essence of what people are understanding now is that the traditional political class and the political parties are not going to bring about the change that is necessary to meet the current moment. That all they will do is mask the problem, but what we need is actual structural changes to improve people's lives.
Entonces, cada sector tiene sus banderas. El estudiantado por el derecho a la educación, el campesinado por el derecho a la soberanía en sus territorios, las y los cocaleros porque no haya fumigación forzada con glifosato, las juventudes porque no sean estigmatizadas en sus comunidades, las personas, mucha gente sin vivienda, peleando porque necesitan una vivienda, el trabajo digno, pero todo eso se va encontrando, cada demanda, cada violencia se va encontrando en la necesidad de que haya un cambio, de que este mal gobierno salga y que empiece Colombia a caminar en función de unos cambios reales como sociedad.
So we see that every major sector of society has its own kind of battle cry or main grievance that it's fighting for. You have students trying to fight for better public education, lower cost of education. You have campesinos trying to get, very harmful land reforms to not take place, and for a redistribution of land to take place. You have cocaleros, coca farmers, who are fighting to prevent the use of glyphosate, a herbicide that is produced by Monsanto, on their land and on their families. You have, every sector, the unhoused, people who lack housing or are housing insecure, asking for better public housing. So, any injustice, every violence, every form of violence that we're seeing in the country is being met with, or is landing with at least one sector of society, and those are starting to build up in a kind of grand consciousness that these things will not improve unless this current government leaves, and we start to, build a path towards reparation and towards justice in terms of solving some of these problems.
Para terminar esta larga respuesta, las causas, o una de las principales causas por las cuales Colombia sigue teniendo una guerra desde hace más de 200 años y hoy tiene un conflicto muy fuerte político y social en las calles, pasa por un sistema, por una clase dominante que, repito, desde hace más de 200 años no permite la participación, no permite la discusión y la construcción de una sociedad diferente, sino que impone su modelo de muerte extractivista, neoliberal, patriarcal, colonial, lo impone a sangre, lo impone a fuego, lo impone acabando con la vida de la oposición política en Colombia.
Yeah, and so I'll end this very long answer by saying that, the origins of this protest, just like the origins of the conflict in Colombia, the armed conflict that has been ongoing for the past 200 years, stems from this very, oligarchical, very traditional, dominant class, ruling class in Colombia that doesn't like dissent, that doesn't allow for differing opinions or different models, and instead just imposes its own model, its own colonial, extractive, patriarchal model of death onto its people by use of force and by use of violence. And that has been the case for the last 200 years.
Muchas gracias, Carlos, por sus palabras. And thank you, Eden, for, translating that. We have another question. So the second question is, how do you take care of your fellow human rights activists and other civilians when they are faced with repression and violence from the state? And what steps can you take to come together in solidarity to work against the state and military? Oh, yo lo puedo traducir.
Vale.
So, la primera pregunta es, ¿cómo están cuidando a sus compañeros que defienden los derechos humanos, los que son activistas y los ciudadanos que están recibiendo la represión y violencia del Estado? ¿Y cuáles son los pasos que van a tomar para mostrar solidaridad y en contra del Estado y del ejército?
Sí. Defender a nuestros compañeros y a nuestras compañeras en este momento es complicado porque las fuerzas policiales, cuerpos especializados de las policías y el ejército están o tienen la orden de atacar de forma mortal y utilizar armas de fuego.
So, right now it's actually very complicated to protect and to take care for, our colleagues, our compañeros and compañeras who are also observing and trying to defend human rights, because the orders from the military and the police, their special forces unit, is to use their weapons, is to use lethal force against anyone who opposes their policies.
Leonardo nos contaba cómo él y otro compañero con carnet de derechos humanos, con chaleco de derechos humanos, igualmente fueron violentados por las fuerzas policiales.
So Leonardo just was talking about how him and another colleague of ours, lawyers, him, a professor at the university, even using a human rights vest and showing their credentials as human rights activists and human rights observers, were brutally beaten by police, and how that was ineffective in deterring violence.
En lo inmediato entendemos que la alternativa de defensa no puede ser quedarnos en la casa y callarnos, sino más bien salir a la calle con más fuerza, con organizaciones de derechos humanos, con movimientos sociales, con el arte, con la cultura, con la lucha feminista de las mujeres y del movimiento popular, con la comunicación popular, las cámaras grabando los hechos de violencia, creemos que es un elemento fundamental.
So in the short term, we understand that the response to this violence cannot be, oh, let's just stay home, let's just protect ourselves. That the response needs to be, well, let's go out in greater numbers. Let's respond with art, with culture, with the feminist voices, with the popular organizations, with our popular media outlets documenting the violations, with our cell phones, recording the actions of the state and showing it for the world to see.
Y en ese mismo sentido, la solidaridad internacional, la presión internacional ha sido fundamental. El gobierno colombiano no le teme, no le preocupa matar gente en Colombia, pero sí le preocupa mucho más cuando gente de otras partes del mundo, cuando organizaciones hermanas, cuando parlamentarios, parlamentarias, amigos, amigas se pronuncian, eso sí le preocupa. Porque le preocupa no tener el dinero de Europa, no tener el dinero de Estados Unidos, del Fondo Monetario Internacional, y eso sí es una preocupación para el gobierno colombiano.
So in that same line, it means that international solidarity is crucial at this moment, and in fact, has a much greater impact than we would think, because the Colombian government really doesn't care about Colombian lives, and they will kill if they need to in order to repress these protests. But what really bugs them is when people outside of Colombia, international organizations, members of Congress start to pronounce themselves and denounce these violations, because they're worried that they will be cut off from European money, from US money, from World Bank money, and they'll be cut off from the financial system. So those kinds of pronouncements and that kind of pressure from the outside is really effective in these kinds of moments.
Que ustedes puedan escucharlos y puedan también protestar en Estados Unidos, porque es el gobierno de Estados Unidos el que está ejerciendo principalmente la violencia contra Colombia, contra nuestra América. La presencia de Witness for Peace, del colectivo solidario, de compañeros y compañeras como Evan aquí en Colombia, resulta vital, salva vidas para el movimiento en Colombia.
And so, being able to be at these kinds of events, speaking to an international audience, that you may join actions, direct actions, congressional actions in the United States is fundamental to show that support at the grassroots level for us, and the presence of groups like Witness for Peace, Solidarity Collective on the ground, people like Evan, really does save lives here in Colombia. Just the fact that they're here and that they open up these kinds of spaces for these dialogues to take place.
Eso en lo inmediato. Pero también entendemos que hay algo mucho más estratégico. Primero, necesitamos y sabemos que esta lucha no es corta, y aunque nos maten 1, 2, 10 personas, 40 personas, como en estos días, tenemos que tener la capacidad de formar nueva población, nuevas generaciones que puedan continuar con esta lucha. Y segundo, sabemos que esta lucha tampoco podremos desarrollarla, no lograremos la liberación en Colombia si no construimos un proyecto internacionalista desde los pueblos. Y eso implica necesariamente también conocer al pueblo de Estados Unidos. No les conocemos, conocer sus luchas y saber que ustedes también en Estados Unidos están siendo víctimas de la violencia, de ese Estado, de ese modelo, que no es Estados Unidos contra el mundo. Es un imperio, es una lógica empresarial contra los pueblos y también contra el pueblo de Estados Unidos. Y desde ahí sabemos que estratégicamente, mirando un poquito más allá, necesitamos juntar nuestras luchas para así construir un proceso de liberación.
And that's in the short term. In terms of strategic patience, or understanding that this is a much broader struggle that'll take many decades in order to fully come full circle, and that even if they they kill 10, 20, 40 people as they have done in the past and they will do in the future. We have to keep forming new people, and regenerating these movements to sustain these battles long term. Secondly, we understand from Congreso de los Pueblos that a solution to what is happening in Colombia will not happen unless we have an internationalist perspective. And for that to happen, we need to build solidarity, and we need to build mutual understanding of the people. For example, we don't really understand the people in the United States, and we must try and separate the people of the United States from the government of the United States and the kind of corporate imperialist structure that imposes violence, not only abroad, but also at home, and understand the struggles of those of you who are in the States and try to unite those struggles to move forward.
Muchas gracias, Carlos, por sus palabras de nuevo. Aquí como colombiana significa mucho para mí y parte de mi corazón está allá siempre. Thank you so much. So, Cynthia, do you want to say something? Do you want to mention?
Yeah, I just wanted to, thank you so much, Michelle. I just wanted to say that Michelle and her friends, there are quite a few Colombians in the US in the South Bay and Colombian Americans and other people who care. So I would love to pull together a little solidarity group. So Evan, I'd like to connect with you about that. But also, our congressperson, Ro Khanna, is actually one of the more progressive in Congress. And so I think we should probably engage him around this. And I also, even just an action at the Colombian consulate in San Francisco would be good. So if anybody's interested in doing some organizing around this, please, I put my email in the chat. So please reach out to me and I'll try to pull a little crew together.
¿Quieres traduzco ahí, Carlos? No sé.
¿Quieres que traduzca?
Sí, dale.
So, Cynthia dice que le agradece mucho y que si necesita organizarse, que aquí hay un movimiento de colombianos en San Francisco, que no dude en contactarla. Ahí está su correo electrónico en el chat. Entonces, que si les interesa pues organizarse también en el Congreso, en el Solidarity Collective, que ahí está ella también. And thank you, we appreciate that. Yeah.
Sí, es bueno.
Sí, hermano.
Dale, sí, que mencionaba también que Ro Khanna, que es el representante de ellos, pues en donde están en Estados Unidos, es pues, bastante progresista y siempre pues tiene una postura muy antimilitarista, muy antiimperialista en estos asuntos. Entonces, bueno, también presionarlo a él que se pronuncie. Están planeando tal vez, junto con otros colombianos, hacer alguna movilización frente al cónsul, al consulado de Colombia que está en San Francisco. Entonces, que ese tipo de acciones me parece fundamental.
Sí. En Colombia en este momento necesitamos mucho de la ayuda de ustedes.
In Colombia, at this moment, we really need your help.
Pero sabemos que no podemos seguir siendo un pueblo que solo pide ayuda.
We also understand that we cannot continue to be a people or a country that only asks for help.
La solidaridad, la ternura entre los pueblos tiene que ser en ambas vías. Y desde ahí la necesidad, como decía Cynthia, de seguir caminando juntos, de seguir caminando juntas y construyendo no solo espacios de visibilidad, sino también de lucha entre nuestros pueblos.
So we understand that solidarity also means horizontality and also means a two-way street. And as Cynthia was saying, we'd love to continue this conversation and this struggle together, in a process of mutual learning and mutual understanding.
Así que compañeras, compañeros, agradecerles nuevamente mucho este espacio y esta oportunidad de hacernos hermanos y hermanas.
Just want to thank everybody who attended and for the invitation and this opportunity to become brothers and sisters in this struggle.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Congreso de los Pueblos, Solidarity Collective, even Carlos, Leonardo, Cynthia, and everyone who helped organize this event. It really means a lot for us Colombians to be heard, and especially in these difficult times. Yeah, I don't have words for what we feel as I said, part of my heart is there. And being here, it's also, you know, my community is also important to me. So it really means a lot, this space. So yeah, so being mindful of time, it's 3:22. So thank you so much again. This is the end of the event. We would like to, you know, especially thank the Solidarity Collective and Congreso de los Pueblos for being here with us, all the speakers, the students, and as an announcement, we had a Jefas open house happening today at 5. So if you can make it, there is information on the website. I'll be posting the website in the chat. And if you have more questions and if you want to help this cause, you can feel free to, you know, also email me at my, you know, personal email. And because as we said, we have a group of Colombians organizing here. So if you want to be part and show solidarity, you know, feel free to email me anytime. And again, thank you and have a good day, everyone. Gracias.
Thank you. Gracias a todos, a todas.
Gracias, Evan. Adiós.
Gracias, compas.
Gracias, Carlos. Hasta luego.
Un abrazo.
Hasta luego.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good having you, Sanjana. Good question.
Yeah.
Great job. Oh my God, that was so solid.
That was solid. Rock solid. Michelle, you did so good. You just seemed so relaxed and so graceful. You were good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I was nervous. It always makes me nervous too.
You want to stop recording?
Oh yeah, I guess so.
Good job. I always